single-digit Ks.
We're busting ours to kick yours.
Fun to watch.
Minus 15.
Respect all, fear none.
Into the upper deck.
Intensity is not a curfew.
Oh, mercy.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
From inside my apartment in downtown Baltimore, it is the MASN All Access Podcast, brought to you by Marymount University. Visit MarymountSaints.com to learn more about our student athletes and programs today. Paul Mancano here with you. Got a lot to get to on this podcast. We're going to have Steve Molesky of MASNsports.com on in just a bit. Talk about this week's 20 in 20s, Gunnar Henderson and Keegan Akin. We're also going to have Mike Bordick on to talk about his experience during the 1994-95 MLB strike when he was in Oakland A, how he stayed in shape during that time, and how he dealt with the fact that baseball was put on hold for an indefinite amount of time. Some lessons and stories from then that we could use during this time. But first, Trey Mancini hopped on a Zoom call with reporters earlier today, talked about a myriad of topics. First and foremost, how he dealt with the tough diagnosis that he got in mid-March that he had stage 3 colon cancer. He put it behind him pretty quickly and moved on within days of getting that diagnosis.
Yeah, I mean, from the second I got the diagnosis, I knew I had to accept it pretty quickly. And I think that's helped me a lot. I didn't really, mope around too much or, it was, don't get me wrong, it was really tough, especially the first few days. And talking to the team was really tough too, and telling them kind of what was going on. But I think accepting it pretty quickly and just, knowing this is what's going to happen, that helped me a lot. And going into my surgery, we weren't sure if it was like later stage 2 or early stage 3. So there was a possibility I was not going to have to do chemotherapy. So that was a little tough. The doctor called me the morning of my birthday and told me that, 3 of my 23 lymph nodes, like there were 3 of them that were right up next to the tumor, had tested positive for cancer in it. So at that point, even though he got the tumor out, the surgery was great and it didn't really break through the colon. You never know if a cell can escape to anywhere else in the body. And the chemo at that point is kind of like an insurance policy, because you don't know if that could spread anywhere else and give you a different form of cancer. So it was a no-brainer to do the chemotherapy for long-term health reasons.
Trey also talked about the strange timing of these events, the fact that he went into surgery and came out of surgery with baseball being put on hold. As he has undergone these chemo treatments, he has had to take all the precautions necessary, going to his chemo treatments alone, coming back, driving himself back alone, all kinds of strange things going on during this health crisis with the coronavirus.
You're right. Actually, that happened literally in the middle of my surgery. So I woke up and I remember my whole family, my mom and sisters, I remember told me that they kind of had shut down spring training and nobody was sure what was going on. So that was after the "Are you okay?" They told me that was going on. So it was just a weird day. It's been a weird couple of months, I think, for all of us too. But especially since the fact that I've kind of been doing what I would have anyway, like post-surgery and stuff. It's a little weird that the world kind of stopped at the same time. And it's just a weird coincidence. But again, I hope that there's a safe way that baseball returns, because it's just it's so strange not having sports on, especially baseball right now. We're about to go into May. It's the first time in my whole life since I was 5 years old that I'm not playing baseball, in late April and May. So, and I think it's definitely the same for all the guys in the league too. So it's just a bizarre time. And I know everybody wants to get out there and play when it's safe. And there's a lot of hurdles that obviously have to be crossed, but I know that, a lot of plans are being set up and there's a lot of different ideas floating around. And I feel confident that it will return at some point this year.
Trey mentioned in his piece with the Players Tribune that he has been going to appointments for his chemotherapy treatments once every 2 weeks. He discussed that a little bit more in detail, the kind of things he is undergoing during these treatments.
I went for my second round of chemo on Monday. So I'm going every other week. I started April 13th. So every other Monday. And then I just went April 27th. I'll go again in 2 weeks. So I mean, I'm still learning, and it could change as it goes a little bit. It could get a little, I could get a little bit more serious side effects. I could, tolerate it better throughout. But the first round, I'd say, went really well and better than expected. I have the infusion. I have two different, drugs that they infuse me with. So the one that goes in Monday kind of makes you sensitive to cold a little bit, like for about 24 hours. So like my fingertips and toes, and like if I drink anything cold, you're really sensitive to that for about 24 hours. And then I had a port put in my chest, and actually a nurse is coming here in about an hour to take that out. And that kind of drips into my port for 46 hours. They install it on the Monday. I get it taken out on Wednesday. And then I'd say the worst day that I had after my first round was the Thursday. So like tomorrow I might be feeling a little more tired and maybe have some minor nausea. But by Friday, I got my appetite back pretty well and was good to go for the next 10 days until I went back on Monday. So hopefully it stays like that, where it's just like kind of 3 or 4 days of not feeling ideal and then 10 days of feeling good. So, I'm hoping for those 10 days or whatever days I'm feeling good, I'm going to take advantage of and, get all my exercise in. And I'm finally able to start, lifting like kind of lighter weights. I got some bands and dumbbells from one of the strength coaches the other day, actually, to have here at the house. So I'm going to start to try to do a little bit of exercise in that regard. I've gone for a couple runs. So I'm definitely able to do some things, not as much as I'm used to, but, I'm going to do everything I can to try to keep up physically because, obviously when you go through this, you lose a little weight. So it's you want to try to maintain and build that back up even while you're going through the chemo.
Trey has obviously received a huge outpouring of support over the past few weeks and past month plus. He mentioned some of the calls that have mattered to him most and stuck out to him the most during this time.
The two I mentioned in my article, Mo and Brooks Robinson, really stood out to me. Mo, again, we all know Mo and everything he's gone through. And he called me, he was really concerned and sad. And it just, it always strikes a chord whenever you talk to him. But, for him to be concerned about me and worried was really touching. And it just goes to show again the kind of kid he is and how special of a kid he is and what he means to all of us. Who play on the Orioles and Ravens and the whole city. So I thought that was amazing. And then Brooks Robinson called me too, the night, I can't remember if it was the night of my surgery or the night after, but he called me and I talked to him for a good 10, 15 minutes. So, and he's one of the best people I've ever come across in the baseball world. And I'm honored to know him and to have gotten to know him over the past couple of years. So those two really kind of stood out to me, I'd say.
And finally, Trey showed the positivity that he has shown throughout this entire process. He was pretty confident that he is not only going to make a full recovery, but he will be back on a baseball field. Probably not in 2020, but definitely at some point.
Yeah, I fully expect to make a full recovery and be back. Like I said, even throughout the chemotherapy, I'm going to be doing things, everything I can to stay in shape and try to maintain my strength and all that. And then, you have a whole off season to get ready for next year too. So there's no doubt in my mind, but there's also a couple risks during chemo. I know that I have to monitor too. There's like a couple side effects that can go along with it, especially I think the biggest one is neuropathy. With this kind of treatment can happen with, it's, I don't want to say rare, but, most people don't get it, but it's possible. So it's something I'm monitoring throughout all that. And we can change the dose around if I start feeling like a little weird in that regard. That's just like kind of a tingling in your fingers and toes. And sometimes it, in really rare cases, it can be irreversible. So that's definitely something that I'm aware of and something that I'm going to monitor because, I chose the treatment plan I did to reduce the risk of that because of baseball. So things like that I'm going to monitor, but I'm doing everything I can, and I have no doubt in my mind I'll be back playing baseball.
Now we bring in MASNsports.com's Steve Molesky, who joins us via Zoom call. Steve, thanks so much for hopping on.
You got it, Paul.
So we just heard a little bit from Trey Mancini's Zoom call with reporters. Look, we knew that the guy was giving with his time, and he has always been great speaking publicly. He's always been incredibly insightful when he speaks, but this was even a special case for him. He gave so much background information. He said it himself. He's an open book, talking about his chemotherapy treatments, talking about what he's been going through really since the middle of March, and just the candor with which he speaks and the positivity. It was like he was saying all this stuff, with a smile on his face almost, because the guy is so positive, and you've known that about him going back to his days in the minors, Steve. I feel like you're especially equipped to discuss the positivity and determination of Trey Mancini.
Well, he's a special guy. He's proving it again. And I mean, Paul, I was just sitting here yesterday thinking, Trey Mancini, cancer. I mean, that just is hard to wrap your head around those words when you think about this special player and what he's become. And I mean, he's overcome a lot in his career. I mean, remember, he was never a top 100 prospect. I mean, he was not supposed to be one of the best players in the American League, but he turned out to be that. And I mean, the Orioles look forward to the day he's back on the field, but such a special kid. I can remember going back to his first year at Aberdeen. I didn't know him except beyond his stats and his bio. And I met him in Aberdeen, and we sat outside the clubhouse and did an interview for 10 or 15 minutes. We probably sat for another 20 or 30 just talking. I drove home that day saying, I don't know if this kid will ever make it, but he's impressive. He's smart. He's articulate. You can tell he's got his act together. And I'll bet you he's going to have a good shot because the things are in place. And now we'll see how the baseball handles itself. And he handled that pretty well, too.
Yeah, I mean, and just the timing of this thing has been so bizarre, too. He went into surgery, he said, and then came out of surgery and was told essentially that baseball had been shut down as he was still coming to. And after the first questions of how are you doing and are you okay, after he was still regaining consciousness, he found out that baseball was coming back. I mean, I can't imagine undergoing chemotherapy treatments while hospitals are currently dealing with a pandemic. He sounds like he's taking all the necessary precautions, but it's just got to be such a strange time and a difficult time for a guy that has to drive himself to and from chemotherapy appointments by himself and go alone. And the guy is going through. Look, everybody's going through a tough time, and he acknowledged that. And he wanted to. That's why he stayed quiet for so long about this. Because he didn't want to, draw attention to himself, knowing how he is. But he now is taking this time to share his story, and it just shows, the kind of stuff that he is undergoing quietly and kind of suffering through quietly.
Yeah, and I mean, he just has what it takes to beat it. We know that, and we know he will, and we don't know the date he'll be back playing at Camden Yards, but we just know it will come.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was really uplifting to see him today for all the media that got to be on that Zoom call. I mean, he looked none the worse for wear. He looked like the regular Trey. We know it's not the case, and we know he's going through something incredibly difficult and tough on his body, but he just has a way of uplifting people. He did it again. He talked about a special relationship with Mo Gaba, the great young fan who's dealt with way more in his life than any young kid should ever have to deal with. And he befriended Mo because he was inspired by Mo. And ironically, now Mo is kind of inspiring him in reverse. I mean, he reached out to Trey and said, stay strong, Trey. I mean, can you imagine that? Yeah. This kid who's as strong as anyone I've ever known and seen, they have a special relationship. It's a genuine friendship. It's not a photo op where they get together once a year and put their arm around each other. Trey sees this kid with no cameras around. He doesn't want, it's not about cameras. It's about a special bond between a pro athlete and a young kid. And so it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And, it's, I feel like a great example of good karma in a way, because everything that Trey gave to Mo in terms of uplifting his spirits, Mo is now giving back. And it just, an amazing story, and we're rooting, obviously, our hardest for Trey to come back 100% whenever that may be, and hope that he's doing better. All right, so, Steve, I wanted to get your thoughts. We've been doing these 20 and 20 series, highlighting 20 Orioles players in their system to keep your eye on 2020 and beyond. This week, we got two guys that you have covered in the past, Gunnar Henderson being one, the 18-year-old who you just spoke with recently. He was a second-round pick by the Orioles in 2019. Still very young, but a toolsy guy. But when he came to Camden Yards, he seemed very mature. Seemed like, he's still a raw prospect, but it seemed like he kind of had the mental makeup to at least advance through the Orioles system. Is that kind of the sense that you got when you spoke to him recently?
It does seem like that. I mean, it does seem pretty mature. I mean, we have to remember he was drafted. He was 17. He turned 18 a couple weeks after the draft, and he's still 18. It hasn't been 12 months since he was drafted. So this kid's young and new and fresh to the organization. And unfortunately, baseball shut down, or he should be playing shortstop at Delmarva every night right now. It's probably where he was headed, his first full pro year. And he's got a lot to offer, Paul. I mean, he's got a really good bat, and they feel like he is going to grow into power. He's been compared to Corey Seager as a comp on the major league level.
Wow.
And some people have said he could be eventually, they think he could be a left-handed hitting version of like Ryan Mountcastle. So, I mean, this kid's got really good potential with the bat. He's got a plus arm. He's a pretty good defender. They don't know if it's 6'3", 195 now and maybe gets bigger. Will he have to move to third? If he does, they feel like the hit tool will play enough at third. So, I mean, short would be great if he stays there. He's a decent fielder, and we'll see how it's going to go. But, he was the second pick last year by the Orioles, number 42 overall.
Yeah, you mentioned he played those 29 games down in the Gulf Coast League. He hit .259, .331 on base, had just one homer, 11 RBIs, .701 OPS. It is just kind of a looking at him like a lot of raw, potential. He could develop that power. He could develop the defensive tools to stick at shortstop long term. But at this point, I mean, he's 18. He is still so far away from the big leagues. It's just a matter of hitting on these certain things. What other things did you glean from your conversation with him when you spoke to him a couple days ago?
I mean, as you said, I think he's a mature kid. I think he understands the process he's going through. I asked him, Paul, about this, and I've asked a lot of players about this when they first turned pro. So in high school, his batting average was .550. And after 4 games at the Gulf Coast League, he was 2 for 16. So I said, what is that culture shock like dealing for, that? And he said, it was new for me. And he said, but I knew it would come. And he said, I had faced top line pitching the summer before on the showcase circuit leading into the draft. So even though he tore up his high school area in Alabama, he had faced elite high school pitching, and he knew he wasn't going to go in there and just tear it up. So it's a process, and the Orioles or no organization overly grades the kid's first 100 at bats in Gulf Coast League. It's just getting into pro ball. And as he said, in a high school, maybe 1 or 2 good arms on a team, and here you're facing all these kids have good arms. So you've got to learn to play and adjust and do proper nutrition and keep your energy up. And you're playing every day, not 3 or 4 times a week. So a lot to adjust to. But this kid's got tools the Orioles really like.
And he comes at a good time for the Orioles, who they are loaded in terms of their farm system and pitching, in terms of pitching talent. They have some exciting outfielders in their farm system, but the infield prospects, they're a little bit short on. They don't have too many guys coming up through the system. They maybe have, a Mason McCoy, a Ryland Bannon, but beyond that, they're kind of thin there. So you feel like almost even if he has to move to third base, he could be very valuable for the Orioles. And that's something that Mike Elias mentioned when he was drafted and when he was signed, was that, the Orioles are in need of these kind of guys. And Adley Rutschman was a perfect number 1 overall pick, but they need to load up in terms of up the middle defenders, whether it be center fielders, but particularly shortstop, second base, infielders.
And the Orioles drafted a lot of up the middle last year. The Hernandez kid and Gunnar and some others. And of course, Adam Hall's like a year ahead of Gunnar, who played at Delmarva last year, did really well. So, I mean, the one thing that I think is not frustrating for fans, but it's the patience we need on these kids. Generally, Paul, the way it works is most teams take a young kid like Gunnar. Let's say if we'd had a normal season, and he probably would have played all year at Delmarva. And then you move them faster later, but usually early, like their first pro season, it's okay for a kid to play a full year, stick with the same coaching staff all year, not have to move. He's got to maybe live with a host family and then just learn to be on his own, be in one environment. And maybe he has a great year. He wins league MVP or he's all-star. He gets accolades. And then you go to Frederick and then maybe you just move him to Bowie later. You know, you can move them faster later, but they tend to move them slower early, fast late. And, you know, when they get there, And as Andy McPhail told us, it's always better to be a month too late than a month too soon on a prospect.
Yeah, exactly. All right, another guy who is much closer to the big leagues, that'd be lefty Keegan Akin, who is the Orioles' number 11 prospect according to MLB Pipeline. A guy who won the minor league pitcher of the year back in 2018. When he was with Bowie, had a breakout season that year. I believe he shared the award with Zach Lowther at that point. But the stats were not there for him in 2019 down in the International League with Norfolk. 25 games, a 4.73 ERA, 1.5 whip. Did lead the league with 131 strikeouts, but the walk rate was up to almost 5 walks per 9, which is just too high. It was the highest ERA, whip, walk rate, hits per 9 rate of his career. But I think to keep in mind the context of it as well, the fact that the International League ERA, median ERA in terms of team ERA, jumped by a full run last year. For whatever reason, nobody was having a good year on the mound, it felt like, in the International League. So I feel like his stats aren't too bad when you take everything into context.
Among pitchers who had enough innings to qualify for ERA leaders in the International League, he was 6th. Can you believe that? At what did you say? It was 4.67?
4.73,
now, there were
yeah.
two things at work here, two major things at work. One was last year was the first year AAA used the Major League Baseball, which, as we know, jumps a little more than the minor league baseball. And so just look at AA offense last year and AAA, huge difference.
Yeah.
So all AAA pitchers face that. Number two, that inflated that ERA you mentioned. Number two, the Orioles really pushed him on pitch development last year. The year before, and Akin has admitted this, he threw 75 or 80% fastballs. No one in the major leagues, almost no one, throws that high percentage. You've got to mix in the secondaries. So the Orioles made sure he did that, and he was throwing 2-0 changeups, 2-0 sliders, pitches and counts he never would have before. They were making him intentionally be uncomfortable out there to learn this is what you're going to need to get major league hitters out. So when I talk to Oriole people like Chris Holt, they were not unhappy at all with Keegan Akin. In fact, the opposite. They were happy with him. He got through a full year. They think he's going to be a durable innings eater type. The kid improved his secondary pitches greatly. And, you know, Paul, in spring training, we saw that. There were games I saw Akin. I remember once against Atlanta, he gave up a 3-run homer to one of their top prospects, and that marred his outing because he rolled through almost the rest of it.
Yeah.
You know, it would have been great on the stat sheet if that one pitch he could have back, but he can't. And so eventually he's going to not have to throw that pitch. But still, you could see the secondaries were better. And so I'm interested to see what comes next for Akin.
Yeah, the scouts describe his developing slider as slurvy. He's really working on that changeup, as you mentioned there, Steve. And that fastball sits between 92 and 95 miles an hour, throwing it a lot less, though, as he said. But having those secondary pitches will help a lot. In terms of where he fits in long-term, the Orioles tried him out in some spring training games, and as you mentioned, he had some good, some bad. So he may not be with the team, say they start the season. Who knows if 2020 were a normal season, but,
Right.
In terms of his long-term development, do you see him potentially as a back-end starter if he hits his ceiling in the big leagues?
That could be. I mean, I think he's, as opening day 2020 hits, whenever it does, or if it had hit in March as planned, he's probably starting at AAA Norfolk. He's a phone call away. And it would be intriguing to see if after the year of development he went through, now can he produce better results? And so now you're looking for him to put more consistency together, put more 2-run, 7-inning outings together, and take a 4.67 and make it a 4.10 or a 3.8 or a 3.6. And then let's see what he can do at the major league level. I think his day will come. He's going to get a chance to see if he can be a starter. And like many pitchers, sometimes they pitch their way to the bullpen. That could happen to Keegan. We don't know. But I think the Orioles are very committed to him as a starter. Left-handed, you like that. He's been through all the stops on the minors. So now the next stop is to see when his day comes and what he does with it when it does come.
Yeah, I expressed on this podcast last week how frustrating it is from a baseball standpoint not getting to see guys like a Keegan Akin, a Zach Lowther, a Michael Baumann, all these guys that are right on the cusp of the major leagues that we just were waiting to see where the chips were going to fall, who was going to make the major league roster, who was going to get an in-season call-up, who was going to be back in Bowie, who was going to be in Norfolk. So many guys, so many Orioles pitching prospects that were right on the cusp of the major leagues, and I feel like Keegan Akin was one of them. Steve, thanks so much for hopping on here on the MASN All Access Podcast. Maybe you could follow Trey's lead, watch The Wire. I'm sure you've seen it already. Watch The Office again. Have you been binging at this point?
Well, I actually have been watching The Wire. I'm one of the guys Mancini was talking about today, and I had never watched it before, so Baltimore people can rip into me for that, and some have. But I'm not as far ahead as Trey. I'm on season 3.
Okay.
It's really interesting. It's really good, and so it's as good as everybody says it is, and I look forward to more.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Steve. We look forward to more from you, of course, on MASNsports.com. You can check him out there and then follow him on Twitter at MASNSteve. Steve, we really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Paul. Thanks.
Now we bring in Mike Bordick, who joins us via Zoom call. Mike, thanks so much for hopping on here during these times.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me, Paul.
So, Mike, how have you been spending your time? It's been almost a month, or over a month, I guess, since we should have had opening day. What have you been doing with yourself?
Yeah, it's been a pretty interesting experience, to say the least, obviously, for everybody involved, really the whole world. But after I left spring training, when they shut down the doors of spring training, took a few days with my kids because they actually came down. They were on their school break. So there were some broken hearts there for sure. A lot of people down about this virus shutting down baseball. So we took like 3 days, went up the coast. And when we got home, just kind of fell into place a little bit. The kids started their school projects. But my wife kind of stirred things up a little bit about 3 weeks ago. She ended up getting some pygmy goats. We have a little farm out here, and we've always talked about, being somewhat of homesteaders, I guess. So she started the process, and here we are learning how to take care of little goats, and I think some chickens are coming next.
Oh, man. What is the process?
It's been fun, man. It's been fun.
Yeah, what is the process of taking care of goats like? I can take care of a dog barely. How do you take care of goats?
Yeah, well, just right now it's feeding them, right? Just like any animal or even some of your children, you got to feed them, keep them alive. That's really the most important thing right now.
Yeah.
So they're still young enough. They're actually feeding off a bottle. So we give them a little goat's milk and give them a couple 3 bottles a day. And, pretty soon they'll be eating some hay and some other things.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's parenthood boiled down to its essence.
The
Just
hope,
make sure
I think, is maybe one day the hope is one day to maybe have some goat's milk or some goat cheese. And if I do ever get to that point, I'll make sure I bring some in for you.
Yeah, absolutely. You're going to have to bring that into the broadcast booth from now on. So, Mike, I wanted to ask you first and foremost about the strike that I think is really the only thing we have that is even close to comparable to what we have going on now. It was in 94-95. You were with Oakland at that point. What memories do you have of going into that strike and kind of the idea that you might not know when this thing is going to end, but you're already so many months into the season, over halfway into the season, and all of a sudden you just kind of have to halt operations?
Yeah, I mean, you could really kind of feel it building as the season went on, in a bad way. But I think as players, we were hopeful that things would get resolved. I mean, there's no way they're going to shut down a baseball season, right? Well, we were wrong. But I think as players in the midst of the season, our thought process was stay in shape, be ready to go. So when they sent me home, I went back to Auburn, Maine. That's where I was living at the time. I recruited a couple of high school kids to hit me some ground balls, throw me some batting practice. We went out to the high school field, every day, every other day. I guess as the summer kind of went on, the workout started diminishing a little bit more, but we were trying to stay prepared because when the bell rang, we wanted to be ready to go. But unfortunately, that bell just didn't ring for us.
Yeah, and when it finally did ring, I mean, what was the relief like when it was finally over? And it obviously took months and months into, the 95 year. What was the relief like to be able to go back? And did you feel like you were ready to go back for baseball?
Yeah. Oh boy. I'm telling you, everybody was ready. The players, I think players with experience kind of looked at it in a different light. I think it becomes more of a business. Obviously the union and ownership was kind of going back and forth with the collective bargaining stuff. So, when you're involved in that, you look at it a little bit differently. But all players want to do is be on the field and play baseball, play the game they love, So that anticipation leading up to the start of that 95 season, I think everybody was on board and excited about it. And with the hope that, it wouldn't happen again. There wouldn't be this kind of break in baseball, and that both sides would ultimately come to a conclusion. And they've been working pretty well together. And it's unfortunate right now with this coronavirus that baseball's, everybody really has taken a step back.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you were able to use some different tactics like recruiting high schoolers to stay in shape. But do you think all of your teammates and I guess players that you played against, do you think everybody else was able to stay in shape, or were you kind of the anomaly?
No, I think I was probably the outcast, really. I think more guys had better opportunities, really, to stay in shape than I did. Me going back to Maine, there was probably still snow on the ground. It was the middle of the summer. So, yeah, there may have been still snow. No, I'm kidding about the snow. But I think for the most part, players kind of anticipated the season starting again. So trying to keep themselves in shape. This is a different beast right here, obviously, this virus that's going around. And I know that players, even myself, and I'm sure you as well, have anxiety about the start of a season, and are trying to stay sharp and focused and keep yourself baseball ready. And I know there are players out there that are still throwing with hopes that, once spring training does start and they get a chance to kind of get themselves going, that they already have their legs, their arms underneath them, and hopefully it just doesn't take as much time. I just don't see any professional athlete that's kind of sitting at home right now not doing anything, because that would just be a detriment to their career.
Yeah. And do you think it's kind of almost more frustrating because we were already several weeks into spring training, the team was already starting to take shape, we were already starting to see some young guys blossom, and then all of a sudden it just gets shut down? It felt like almost, guys like Chris Davis was starting to build some momentum heading right into the season, and then all of a sudden they just have to stop and go home.
Yeah, I think the Orioles, Brandon Hyde, we're really in a good place in spring training. Now, were they going to win 100 games? I doubt that. But there was a nice feeling for the clubhouse. Pitching was turning the corner. Doug Roquel had really done a nice job kind of getting in the pitcher's ears, making them more aggressive. So there was a good feel in spring training. You're right. Chris Davis was a great spring training story. Some of the young guys really starting to show their worth. So there was excitement, anticipation, just like I think any spring happens with any team. There's that good feeling. It's a rebirth. It's a renewal. Maybe this team turns the corner with the help of some younger players. So, it's unfortunate that it just got shut down like that so abruptly. But, I think this team going into the end of last year had some pretty good chemistry going, and I think they'll be able to kick it right back up. They have a lot of great motivation, obviously, to start the season. Getting back, getting the fans going again. But also Trey Mancini, I think, is a great inspirational story for these guys to kind of rally around and use him as the call for the year.
Absolutely. And it was great news to hear that he's on his way back to recovery, and hopefully he is going to make a 100% recovery, even if he may not return to the field in 2020, that they feel confident that he will be back at some point. Mike, I do want to ask you also about the 1997 Orioles in the 1997 ALDS, because we have been replaying those games and rebroadcasting those games on MASN. And that team, talk about a team that almost did win 100 games. They won 98 games that season. You, of course, had 4 hits in the ALDS. Just how good was that team heading into the postseason?
Boy, I still look back, and I played on some really good teams coming up with the A's, the Bash Brothers and stuff like that. I think that 97 Orioles team was the best team I played on. Just an incredible group of veteran players and young superstars. Had great pitching as well, a deep bullpen. Myers was the best closer in the game that year. So it was a little shocking when it came unraveled by the Indians. But the ALDS was a good battle against a great team as well. The Mariners had some studs on that team, right, with Randy Johnson and Griffey Jr. But it was fun. And there are always great unsung heroes that I think show up in the postseason. Rebele was one of them who hit the home runs off Randy Johnson. But really, it all came down to the pitching, and always does in the postseason. We had Mussina and Erickson that were dealing, Jimmy Key. And, of course, Kamenicki, I think, was an unsung hero for the whole year, really, in 97. He came away with, I think, 10 wins as a spot starter. So, a lot of positive stuff, a lot of great feelings. Unfortunately, we weren't able to hoist the trophy that year. And that's always the goal, and what everybody in Baltimore is anticipating as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned the pitching that you were going up against in that ALDS, including Randy Johnson. I looked at it. It looks like you had the first RBI of that postseason and of that series against Randy Johnson in a 9-3 win in Game 1. What was it like to go up against Randy Johnson at, really the peak of his career at that point?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, Paul. Well, I was kind of that type of player all year in 97. It was no surprise to me that I'd pick up that first RBI. No, I'm kidding. Actually, I struggled really all year in 97. It was a tough offensive year. Played okay defensively, but I don't know. Postseason came, and I felt pretty good. I had some good confidence going. And Randy Johnson, of course, I don't know if that was the peak of his career, but he was definitely pretty darn close to it.
Yeah.
He was intimidating. Wasn't the best looking guy either to look at out there. He was like 6'11", so his release point seemed a little bit closer. Every fastball felt like it was going to take your kneecaps off. But, in the postseason, you let it fly. I know Buck Showalter always talk about you roll your dice and you hope it comes up right for you. And against the Mariners, it did for us, because that was definitely a challenging opponent.
Yeah, and then those first 2 games, you get 9-3 wins in back-to-back games on the road. That sets you up to come back home and clinch the thing and head to the ALCS. What was that like, just the emotions of not only getting those 2 huge road wins, but then heading back home to clinch it?
Yeah, that's what the challenge was, I think, playing over there in the Kingdome. The Mariners have a beautiful new stadium now, but back then it was the Kingdome, or it was all enclosed. It was like the old Metrodome. So it was loud and it was obnoxious. I think the ceiling, parts of the ceiling had started to fall down then. So it was a pretty intense atmosphere, but it was nice to come away with some wins and bring it back home to Baltimore. And that's the place you want to win right there. I mean, I don't know. Playing against the Orioles through the early 90s, and then to be a part of that team in 97 and see what they went through in 96, it was incredible. And the fan base was spectacular. I mean, you want to talk about feeling like a rock star. Every night it sold out. Every night, all summer long. It was incredible. And it was so much fun, and maybe the best experience I've ever had playing the game, really, that 97 season. Even though the frustrations were there, some offensive numbers, but just the fan support, the team, and the way the city kind of rallied around was just incredible. It was so much fun.
And I'm sure Baltimore can't wait for their next Orioles playoff team and the next time that they are back in the playoffs and have a rocking Oriole Park at Camden Yards. And first step is just getting baseball back at this point and getting any kind of baseball being played at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. Don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have anything to share with Orioles fans who are missing, as everybody is, missing the sport that they love? Anything that you kind of want to say, having gone through a strike yourself, having gone through an extended layoff, about, you know, getting baseball back at some point and trying to stay positive through this whole thing?
Yeah, well, fortunately, I think for Oriole fans, they get to show some highlights on MASN. I think that's pretty encouraging. And I know we get sick of sometimes seeing the same games played over and over again, but I think we all kind of love going down memory lane and kind of reliving some of the glory days. So, shoot, maybe we can get some of your old high school videos in there as well, Paul. Check out some of your some of your swings.
There's not much to see there.
For the most yeah, I think in a lot of ways, everybody misses something that they aren't able to do right now. And for us, it's being around baseball. There's still basketball, hockey playoffs that, potentially could or couldn't happen. So there's a lot of people with these little side notes going on about, they wish they could be entertained. Some of the greatest athletes, in the world. But the fact of the matter is, there's still a problem going on, globally. And I think people are, pretty much aware of that. I know we have our wishes and hopes, but we got to get through this first, and make sure it's a clean, safe environment for everybody. At least come up with a good plan. And then let's open the curtains up, man, and get excited. I mean, even just you and I talking about baseball, I get goosebumps thinking about that first game, and how exciting it's going to be for everybody involved. And, baseball can be a huge healer, for a lot of people. So that's the way I'm kind of looking at it. I think the hope and anxiety, the anticipation now of like a second spring training almost. And really, that's what it's going to have to be. But I think just, passion, showing the passion for the game when it's back, and obviously remembering, what this world has just gone through.
Yeah. Well said. Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike. We really appreciate you hopping on here on MASN All Access. I hope to get some updates about those goats at some point in the future.
Paul, anytime. Thanks for having me on your show. It's the first time in, I don't know, however long as you've been doing this.
Yeah.
So I appreciate it.
Awesome. Mike Bordick joining us here on the MASN All Access Podcast. That's it for the MASN All Access Podcast. We have podcasts coming your way every Wednesday, and we also have MASN All Access shows coming your way every Tuesday at 3 o'clock. Thanks to Mike Bordick and Steve Molesky for hopping on. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify. Watch it on YouTube. Watch it on Facebook. Wherever you're getting your podcasts, you can get the MASN All Access Podcast. Appreciate it. And, of course, the MASN All Access Podcast is brought to you by Marymount University. Visit MarymountSaints.com to learn more about our student athletes and programs today. We'll see you later.